Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar in association with the National Care Forum. Thank you for joining us for what is set to be a really useful conversation today. I'll shortly be handing over to Liz, Policy Director at the NCF, who'll run through the format. But I just wanted to let you know how things are going to be working today in terms of questions. So we will be asking some questions to you via a set of polls today. We'd really encourage you to get involved in those because that's going to let us know what we want to put directly to the CQC. You can also ask your own questions if we've not featured those within that set of polls, just using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen there. Please use the Q&A, not the chat, so we don't want to miss anything. I would ask you to bear with us. This is our highest number of registrations we've ever had, so we are anticipating a lot of questions. Any that we don't get to today, we will endeavour to answer post-session. We'll be creating some additional content that we will feature on the CMM website. The webinar is also going to be recorded, so that will be popped onto the website again next week at some point, and you will all receive an email with a link to that once that's live. Today's session has kindly been supported by Medicare, so before I hand over to Liz, we've got just a few words from them.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lawrence. The Medicare team are delighted to be able to support this Care Management Matters webinar. Medicare's market-leading EMR solution is designed to simplify, safeguard, and enhance medication management for care home residents. Our EMR solution continues to evolve both in functionality and facilitating time savings. Trusted by partners such as HC1, Bupa, and Care UK, Medicare's EMR seamlessly integrates with community pharmacy providers and other technology platforms such as Nourish, PCS, and CareVision. These integrations ensure coordinated care, single entry data, and exceptional medication management. To enhance medication management in your care home, please give us a call on 0161 232 4575 or use the links provided at the end of the webinar. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. Thanks.
Thanks so much to Lawrence there from Medicare. All of their details are on the CMM website and they'll be featured on the page on which we'll share the webinar next week. So I'm now going to hand over to Liz, who's going to chair the webinar for us and get things going. Thanks so much, Liz.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm just going to try and share my screen. I haven't done Zoom for a bit, so are you seeing that? Yeah?
Yes, seeing that, thank you.
Okay, right. So I just wanted to welcome everybody to the webinar today and just give you a little bit of context about why we suggested to the CQC that we should host this, but also a few caveats, because we started talking to the CQC about running a summer webinar, really trying to get to the bottom of some of the difficulties with the single assessment framework. We started talking to them, gosh, probably back in May, perhaps a bit earlier. And so obviously lots of things have happened since then. And I'm just going to refresh our memories a bit about how we've got to where we are, because it's been a bit of a long journey. And also, I think there were things that none of us quite predicted, to be honest. Now we're going to have Mary Cridge, who's Director of Adult Social Care, and Dave James, who used to be Head of Policy in that team and is now Deputy Director of Policy and Strategy. So the things that we're going to be focusing on with them are the single assessment framework, the ways of working that they're going to be reviewing, and the regulatory approach. These are not the people to talk to about all of the IT, technical, digital stuff. For that, we need Mark Sutton, who's the Chief Technical Officer, is he called, or Chief Digital Officer? And I'm sure he'd come and talk to us. He's been to talk to our members. Oh, and I'm Liz Jones. I'm the Policy Director at the National Care Forum. We're a membership organisation for not-for-profit providers of care and support. And as a trade association, we get the opportunity to talk to the CQC quite a lot. We have monthly meetings, and we also get to go along to those various groups that they've created. The provider group that we all went to last year, I imagine, which I want to talk to them about because we don't want a repeat of that where we all joined and then found that what we'd said wasn't really listened to. So they will be coming along. They're going to join us in a little while. They couldn't make it for 2 o'clock, but they'll be with us in a little while. So I just wanted to kind of remind us of where we've got to. And then, because I've been on lots of these webinars where you really don't get the chance to stick your hand up and speak, partly because of time, partly because of volume. But I wanted us to have a bit of a look at some of the key questions that we've suggested under the 3 categories that we've agreed that we should focus on in relation to the single assessment framework, the regulatory approach, and new ways of working. So you've probably all forgotten, I had till I look back, that this was all, where we've got to now, all began with the CQC's new strategy, which I think they consulted on during 2020. It's quite hard to remember because we were in the depths of COVID, weren't we? But it certainly, they felt, I think, that they needed a new way of doing things. And of course, remember that the CQC acquired new powers around assessments of both integrated care systems and local authorities. So they were going to have to change some of the ways they looked at us all, because they were going to have to find a way to assess different bodies, different organisations, as well as health and care delivery providers. So the idea of the single assessment framework came from that. And you will probably, lots of you have been on the journey, kind of thinking, okay, so the strategy was going to be implemented from 2021, and there was this promise around smarter regulation, massive reliance on this concept of sort of dynamic data flow, but also a recognition that they might be able to use data slightly differently to complement inspections perhaps more than they had done, and to build that picture of how well our providers, our care providers, were delivering their services. And there was a big focus also on the voice of people, which had been a criticism, I think, of the previous approaches, that the voice of people wasn't really fully embedded in the way that they were assessing. I think they'd say that was fair. So we had the development, didn't we? We had the development of the single assessment framework, and that kind of rumbled on really during 2022 and 2023. So based on that promise that they were going to put the voices of the people that we support at the heart of their new approach, they spent some time talking with TLAP, Think Local Act Personal, looking at their I statements about what you or I would expect and need in terms of the care and support that we were looking for, and then frame those individual I statements into we statements as commitments of what we would do as care and support providers to meet those wants and needs. And so they built the jazzy triangle, really. So the 5 key questions didn't change, did they, around, you know, safe, well-led, responsive, all of those. But those 2 sets of statements, the I statements and the we statements, got translated into the things that we now call quality statements. And they replaced 300 plus, was it? 300 plus key lines of inquiry. So we'd got to 34 quality statements grouped under the 5 key questions. And then we had a lot of debate about evidence to show that those key quality statements had been met. So there were different themes. There still are different themes of evidence. And actually, in those themes of evidence, the focus has really shifted to looking at feedback. So feedback from the people we support, feedback from our colleagues, our staff, the leaders of our organisations, and feedback from partners. So that might be other professionals, other community health professionals, that might be our commissioners and our local authorities, that might be our integrated care systems. So the voice of people and partners has been strengthened considerably in this approach. And then sitting under the evidence were a list of kind of specific pieces of evidence and quality indicators. And I'm not sure that's perhaps been as clear as it might be. And there seem to have been some gaps, which we certainly talked to the CQC about as they were developing it. So, for example, they weren't able to quote any specific measures for outcomes, which seemed very surprising. And the challenge that they said they were facing in social care was that we didn't have any kind of standard indices of outcomes or any adopted outcome measures. But of course, that doesn't mean we don't have outcomes. And actually, one of the most important things in all of this are the outcomes that we achieve with people, for people, in terms of the care and support that they want and the things that they need to help live their best lives. So that all seemed to take quite a long time to evolve. And there's been alongside that, it's been some quite complicated kind of scoring approaches. And again, the principle of scoring, they said, was to try and bring greater transparency to the ways in which they made their ratings. And that was to try and respond to the consistency challenge, because providers across all sectors, but particularly in social care, have often shared their concern about a lack of consistency between different inspection teams. So we had this approach to the SAF. And then towards the end of last year, I think as they realised that perhaps implementation might be quite challenging of this new single assessment framework, we had this concept of priority quality statements, which you will all be familiar with. They first mentioned that to us in the December, and that seemed to be saying that there were some key priority quality statements that they would ask all their teams to look at. Now, it doesn't take much to do the maths to say if you're looking at 5 out of 34 quality statements, that leaves 29 that you haven't looked at. And even if you look at a few of those, even if you look at 10 quality statements, you've still got 24 that you haven't looked at. And that, of course, brought in the issue of legacy evidence. And by that, when we talked to the CQC about this, you know, there are only 2 ways to go with this, aren't there? If you are looking at, if you're looking at new evidence, then you need to look at a broader range of quality statements and the things that you are looking for the service to demonstrate. So you've got new evidence. And if you don't have new evidence, then you have to look at old evidence. But of course, old evidence could be very old. And if you're a service that has improved significantly in the last 5 years, the way the current scoring is working is that it's actually very difficult if lots of your old evidence was suggesting that you were at the requires improvement end of things, and you've done lots and lots of work to improve your service. If the CQC is not looking at all that work, then it's very difficult for you to show across the board that you have significantly improved what you do. And that is really demoralizing for everybody, isn't it? That's really demoralizing for your managers, for your staff team, for your leadership, for your boards. You know, if you've worked really hard to improve things, you want your regulator to be looking at that and making a judgment on how things are now, not how they were. So then we had a bit of a reversal of that whole approach, and you'll be forgiven for not having found the blog from the then CEO, Ian Trenholm, because it was, I don't know, I think it's on the CQC's website somewhere. But anyway, it was a summary of learnings. So I think the rollout of the single assessment framework began with a pilot, but that pilot was really not very long, and there wasn't very much time to take the learnings from the different regions where the pilot rollout was happening. But this blog seemed to be a summary of that learning, and providers had been quite clear about their concern about the number of quality statements that were being looked at and whether assessments were being based on out-of-date evidence, and really how much use that is. I mean, the regulator's key purpose is to help us as members of the public and as current users or potential users of care and support services, help us to understand what the regulator thinks about our current quality, isn't it? I mean, that's what it's all about. So in March, there was a commitment that if an assessment was being done of a service that had a current rating of inadequate or requires improvement, then all the quality statements would be looked at, not just the 5 priority ones or the 10 in total. So that was a step forward, I think. I'm yet to understand if that's being properly implemented, if people are experiencing that. Certainly when we checked in with members a month or two ago, it was perhaps not as consistent as you might think you'd like. Then things started to unravel a bit, kind of publicly. We'd been, as trade associations, NCF, the Home Care Association, Care England, the National Care Association, we'd all been raising our concerns privately and publicly about how things were working out. And of course, remember that alongside this total overhaul of the assessment process and all the digital changes that the CQC were bringing in, they've also had very significant staff changes. And I think it's fair to say that some of the structures, some of the way they were organising their teams to have more of a regional picture, but perhaps less of a specialist understanding of different sectors, I think that is potentially something that they're going to have to look at. And I think it might well have been in the most recent review by Penny Dash. So in June, we had the resignation of Ian Trenholm, and then we had an interview about a week later with Kate Tironey saying that you know, they felt they had a problem, and by this point the review, the Penny Dash review, had been announced. So then in July we had the apology from Kate Tironey, our recognition that things were not going well, and that they had these 3 urgent and immediate areas of action around better information for the regulatory approach, increasing the number of assessments, because lots of people have been waiting a very long time, and also the the ever ongoing problems of registrations. I mean, that is a significant impact, not just on providers in terms of sort of financial and operational impact, but on the people who are hoping to be moving into those rooms that are yet to be registered in a service that's being expanded or a service that is new. So I think we need to talk a bit about that. Then they obviously recognised the problems with the portal, and they have been going on for quite a long time. And again, it's a huge waste of everybody's time when the technology doesn't work and when you've got to do lots of workarounds and spend a lot of time assuring yourself that the things you're trying to send to the CQC have actually got there. And then there was a commitment around ways of working, because it's been very unhelpful to remove that kind of local contact with your local teams and have a kind of black hole of a central communication point. That has gone down very badly. So we had then the Penny Dash review and the interim findings, which were announced very quickly and with pretty robust commentary from the Secretary of State, Wes Streeting. So those were the kind of 5 topics of the interim findings, summarising the problems that that Penny Dash found, talking to everybody across the sector, not just in social care, but in health as well. The poor operational performance, which I think it would be fair to say we've all lived with, real issues around the tech, a significant loss of credibility, concerns around the assessment framework, and we can look at some of those in more detail, and a lack of clarity around ratings and that problem around legacy evidence. So focusing more on the SAF, we'd said for a while it was hard to know what good would look like in the single assessment framework. I've mentioned the lack of focus on outcomes, and actually there are lots of outcome measures that we could use, we could adopt, we could choose to adopt as a sector, should we wish. But in the framework as is, they aren't there. The fact that the website is dreadful. I mean, the website was so dreadful that at NCF, we pulled together a big briefing towards the end of last summer, just putting everything in one place because it was so difficult to find it all easily and then download it and then share it with your teams. So we started our mega briefings for members just to put it all in one place. There's a lot to be done to show how the data is being used and interpreted. And there's nothing around use of resources and effective delivery of care. And then innovation, which links really back to good and outstanding. So I suspect it suffered from the risk focus that the CQC has had since COVID, really. So I'm just going to whiz through these because we're going to go to some polling in a minute, but I just want you to see how we've decided to sort of structure our discussion with the CQC. So we've got 3 groups of questions, and in a minute you'll be able to vote on each of the 3 groups because we've all got loads of questions, I know, and we can't ask all of them. So we put together a selection of questions and we'll ask you to vote on which ones you think are the most important to ask in a minute. So our 3 categories are asking the CQC how they plan to respond to the concerns about the implementation of the SAF. So that, is it that we want to talk about too few quality statements? Is it about the legacy evidence and ratings? Is it about scoring? What can they do now and what can take time? Because they were suggesting things a little while ago in a call with providers, but providers are quite nervous because actually if the system's flawed, speeding up now might not help us. Do we need to have a pause? And what about that public confidence? That was our first category, and we'll put some polls up in a minute. Our second category is around what they actually mean by improving their regulatory approach. And I've guessed there's some scope here to think about what Penny Dash found. So what they're going to do now, what they're going to have to wait for, when are they going to bring back that better relationship management? When are we going to do that proper co-production? They've promised us a provider handbook, which we suggested at least 12 months ago, possibly 2 years ago. And when will all the registration delays be resolved? And then our third question is about their ways of working, which is that, you know, we spent a lot of time talking to them about how it should work, and that didn't seem to get listened to. You know, when are we going to do proper early learnings? What are we going to do about the staff? Are they going to bring back a specialist approach? How do we get a proper partnership? What do we do about that power imbalance? Because, you know, there are some people who have a terrible inspection experience. Other people have a great one. But, you know, either way, the regulator has great power. And then when can we expect to get better value for our regulatory fees? Because we pay a lot of money for this. So, Lisa, I'm going to stop sharing, and then I think if we could go into our polling for each of the categories, each of those 3 categories. And the idea of doing this is to try and get a sense of, on the call, we've got 182 people on a call, so we're not going to be able to get everybody's ideal question, but I want you to choose which of the questions you would most like us to ask. So don't choose all of them. Try to prioritize 2 or 3, because then we can make sure we ask them today. So this is the first one about the single assessment framework. So this is the set of questions that say, what are you going to do about quality statements? What are you going to do about old ratings? How are you going to make the scoring better? What are you going to do now? Do you need to pause the SAF? Oh, well done. Well done. You're voting. You're voting, giving it your best shot. You'll have to bear with me, because once we've finished, I need to write down what order they were. Okay, so it's looking like scoring is a biggie. Pausing is a biggie. And then what we're going to do about looking at too few quality statements. Okay, brilliant. Right, so this was our second category of questions for you to rank. So this was about improving the regulatory approach. So what are they going to do, basically, following Penny Dash? And bear in mind that, you know, they've got formal governance stuff to go through, but they presumably can give us an indication. There's a commitment already around the relationship management stuff. So when are we going to know about that? So we're consistently at the 60% mark around the first one. We don't care about the second one. Better relationship management, that's getting a lot of votes. The co-production's getting a lot of votes. And registration delays, that's getting some votes. Okay, I think we've got a consensus there. Right, should we go to number 3, category C, our third poll?
That should be live.
Oh, great. So hopefully you can all see now our third area of discussion. So this is about rethinking ways of working. Can't see any voting yet though, Lisa. Can people vote on it? Oh yeah, here we go. Here we go. So this is the question about getting our input. What's going to be different? This is one about what we're going to do about staffing, what we're going to do about early learnings, how to get a proper partnership, value for money for our fees. It's interesting. We've consistently argued for a service level agreement as a customer, key customers. So we'll see. I think there's a consistent level of interest in the proper partnership. That's kind of sticking around 70-odd%. Early learnings from the SAF rollout. That's quite popular. I can see Dave.
Sorry, Zoom is very different to Teams, so I'm just getting my head around it. Okay.
I've just been having to remember how to do Zoom. So hopefully we've got Mary too. Oh yes, I can see she's there. So just to, I'm just going to pop these back up. So just while we were just doing a bit of a recap, and we were doing a bit of voting in terms of things that people were particularly interested in under categories of questions. So let me just pop this back up, because this has got the results of the polling on, will help us guide our discussion. So we'd talked about kind of 3 areas of discussion during our hour, and I'll hand over to you in a minute, but just so you can see on our polling, we had a category around responding to the concerns about the SAF. So a lot of interest in how to make scoring more transparent. Oh, hang on, let me go back. We asked, people voted on the questions that they were particularly interested in asking you. So interest in scoring, interest in quality statements, interest in whether we need a pause. So I'll keep an eye on those questions. Perhaps we can make sure we talk about those, and then some others. Under our second category about improving the overall approach and the findings from the interim report. So a big interest in what's going to happen now, and a big interest in the relationship management, and a big interest in the provider handbook discussion. And then in our third category, a lot of interest in this partnership approach, the power problem, a lot of interested in early learnings from the SAF, and then interested in that kind of value for money thing, and interested in learnings. So I'm going to stop sharing and let you introduce yourselves, and then perhaps we can start on that, talking about your ambitions around responding to all the anxieties about the implementation of the SAF, if that's okay. Is that okay?
It's fine.
Lovely. And then I'm going to have a quick look in the Q&A, because I've not looked at that yet while we were doing our polling questions. So over to Mary and to James. Please do introduce yourself. We've got 180 odd folks on the call. They've been very good so far. They've been helping us to poll on the most important topics within the discussion. So I think they're really keen to hear from us all. So over to you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Liz. My name's Mary Cridge. I'm the Director of Adult Social Care at CQC, and I work in the regulatory leadership team. And absolutely delighted to be here and have this opportunity to hear your questions and hopefully help with them. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Mary. Nice to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Dave James. I'm the Deputy Director in our Policy and Strategy Unit, and I lead on the regulatory model.
Thank you. And thank you for coming to talk to us. And I've told everybody we're not talking digital IT or portal. That's not in scope. So let me just pop this slide back up so you can just have a quick look at it. These were, hopefully, hang on, let me try and share that. So under our first kind of category of question, and I'm pretty sure you'll have other things you want to talk about, but there was a lot of interest in how we do something about the scoring. There was a lot of interest in whether or not we need to do something pausing or not. And there was a lot of interest in the quality statements problem as it's perceived by providers. And then with its associated kind of legacy evidence problem. So shall we start with talking about the implementation of the SAF? Because I know you'll have been thinking about it back at the ranch.
Okay, so I think if we're addressing those questions, I'll hand to Dave in a minute, but I'd just say that the question of pausing is not something we're contemplating. The message, in fact, has been, we're trying to do more. We want to do it right, of course, and it needs to be meaningful and valuable, and it needs to be a fair assessment of the services as provided and experienced by the people in that service. But the questions that you helpfully shared, Liz, there's quite a bit of technical sort of elements there, which this is Dave's bag. So I'm going to hand to Dave for that, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you mind popping them? Is it possible to pop them back up?
Yeah, of course. Hang on.
Thanks. So I can try and do justice to them.
So yeah, we had scoring and quality statements and evidence. The pausing is off the agenda, so we can ignore that one. And I don't think we didn't appear to have too much worry about confidence.
Okay.
So let's focus on the sort of top three.
At the risk of stating the obvious, but it's not always obvious. Sometimes when people talk about single assessment framework, I think they mean everything. They mean our model and what we're delivering, which there are issues with, and which is a lot of what Penny Dash has pulled out. What we've heard more confidence and support about, including from Penny, is the framework itself, and that's actually that's the thing we want to hang on to. But we've clearly misstepped in a number of ways in terms of how we've implemented that, in the way that we've built the IT, and in the way that the processes within that IT system and the flows and all of that stuff that has to happen in a kind of a process hasn't supported us to be effective. That's obviously very clear. So there are some issues which are about how do we improve the process, how do we take away barriers which are there that we don't need, that don't add value, that mean we're not getting out to do assessments and inspections, that we aren't updating ratings as often as we want to. And there are also some so they're kind of those system process kind of issues. And then there's also issues around the clarity of what we're trying to do, the clarity of what the assessment framework means in a bit more detail, which again is something that Penny has picked up. So and I think together, particularly the process issues and the implementation problems that we've faced, are obviously they're impacting our performance, which has been called out, and that will be having an impact on the scope of individual assessments. Now, I think we need to do more to understand where we're not doing enough, and one of the things we'll be doing, as well as simplifying our approach, working with you and other stakeholders to understand how we can simplify the approach and still deliver what we want to be a quality product. How can we do that so that we're actually able to look at sufficient scope and actually change ratings? Now, I think I need to understand a bit more about what is actually happening in terms of how many quality statements are being looked at, and we will be doing. We do need to understand whether there's more directives we need to do centrally to make sure. So, for instance, we always look at all of requires improvement and inadequate key questions, or we should be. And if that's not happening, then that needs to be addressed. I think the second question is more in the realms of the policy and what can we do to overcome the age of ratings. Now, the kind of the pure intent behind the model, if you recall, was that we're able to much more frequently come out and update assessments. That relied on a solid bedrock of up-to-date ratings, which across all the sectors we don't have. We've not been. So this kind of predates the SAF. This goes back to our Chloe model as well, where we weren't doing enough inspections to keep those ratings up to date. So we're kind of starting, 10, 20 steps back from the starting line, essentially. So this is another thing that we really want to be working with you on is, what are the solutions to that? How do we get around that within the resource and capacity that we've got? What are the options, again, to deliver a quality assessment, a timely assessment, but one which gets us over this hump as quickly as possible? So I don't have the answers. I don't think you'd expect me to today, but that is something we want to work with you on, to understand what the possible options might be. And it might be, you might feel the assessment framework itself is too large, that we might have overreached. It might be that we phase in evidence, the patterns of evidence categories that we've talked about. It might be that we have a more flexible approach to that, but with everything there'll be trade-offs. So it's what we want to explore. These are issues that we're aware of and our priorities to us. Similarly with the scoring approach, one way that we can improve understanding of that, well, then there's two ways actually. And again, it comes back to exploring this in partnership and in co-production and co-design with providers and with other partners and stakeholders. What's the best way of using scoring? There's clearly value there. We want to still be able to use the scoring approach. We still think there's value in it, in supporting us to get into a place where we're more consistent, which is a huge issue, as we know, and has been historically. So it gives us a better approach to that. It's clearer in terms of the reporting and the kind of the clarity, if we're able to call out at that topic level, at that quality statement level, what the areas of strength and development might be. So we still want to hang on to scoring, but for instance, is scoring at evidence category level essential and helpful, given that that is proving to be quite a complex model, one which we've essentially had to test in a kind of a live environment. So we need to listen to the feedback and understand what we're seeing and see what it means for our performance and our effectiveness, and explore what's the right level at which to score. What value does scoring give, not just to us as the regulator, but to providers and to the public? And I suppose the second part of that is, how do we explain it more clearly than we currently have? Now, if we end up simplifying it, that makes that job easier, obviously. But there's lots of feedback about how clear the website is, how clear our guidance is, and that's the handbook piece of work that we'll be kicking off, which I think is starting. I think that's starting next month, where we just really want to understand what do you need, where are the key areas. Now, obviously, we've got some pointers from the interim report from Penny Dash. I think we'll get much more rich feedback as we start to engage with providers in a deeper way. So really understanding what will help. We've got a sense of that, but we want to add to that. What can be done now and what will take time?
Well, I think,
sorry, shall I pause there?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the handbook point we need to talk about. So that's kind of interesting. There's quite a lot of interest in that, actually. So let's, on the basis that we're not pausing, what can be done now? I think we could probably pick up under our next batch of questions, but I'm just going to quickly have a quick look at the Q&A, because
would you like the headlines of what we're thinking about for the handbook?
Yeah, let's talk about the handbook, because it's something that we talked about quite a long time ago, wasn't it? And I was saying to our guests on the session earlier that because we found the website so sort of impenetrable, we ended up writing our mega briefing, because we had to try and put everything in one place, and it was really hard to download stuff off the website. And then that made us realize we had loads of questions. So we had to we were trying to write something akin to that, not at a kind of policy level as opposed to a practitioner level. So I would really like to hear about the handbook and kind of your reflections from the review so far. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so I recognise absolutely that this is something that Liz, you and others have been asking about, and Kate made a commitment, didn't she, in her email in July around it. And as David said, work starts on it next month. It's going to be, well, we want to do it together so it meets everybody's needs. But the headlines will be, what can you expect from an inspection? So that builds on some of the work we've done together pre-COVID, wasn't it, on how to get the best out of your inspection. And then, to use one of your phrases, what customer service standards you should expect from CQC. So that might be everything from because an inspection assessment is not just what happens on site, is it? So I'd expect a handbook to cover those phases, what you can expect when, and what you can expect from CQC, and what CQC could reasonably expect from a provider. And then, although we've got our SAF, that as Dave has said, there's nothing in the Penny Dash report that doubts the sort of fundamental soundness of the SAF. It's all about how you implement and what you do with it. And it is built on the think local, act personal I and we statements, which we stand by. But can we together articulate what we think good looks like for different services? Because we've got a huge range of services of type and size and so on, just within social care, never mind the parameters beyond that that we regulate. So that's what I think would be the key sections in a handbook. But what this is not going to be is CQC sitting in a darkened room working out what we think. We'll want to know what providers, people using services, stakeholders think, so that we get it as right as it can be first time, and then that we keep it under review and iterate it and improve it. One of our challenges at the moment, which many of you I'm sure have been involved in, big change and so on, our dilemma at the moment is the balance between going at pace, because there's a lot we want to improve quickly, but not rushing solutions and things through that haven't been properly thought through, co-produced, and that unintended consequences have been identified before they actually happen. But so that's the sort of vision for the handbook. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to that, Dave.
No, I think that's really helpful, Mary. Yeah.
Okay. So just to take us back one step, because I'm interested in what we should be, how our participants can potentially get involved in that. But I'm just looking at some of the Q&A. So there's concerns still about how many quality statements people were looking at when there was previous non-compliance. So I think we've heard that feedback for a while. So that kind of shift that was being proposed after Ian Trenome's blog, that sort of March to June chunk of time, I guess. That is perhaps not happening on the ground. So I think I think that for me, there is a disconnect between the policy bit of the CQC and the pilot bit of the implementation bit of the CQC, because I didn't realise you had whatever his name is, who's the director of all the ops teams, who isn't you, if you saw what I mean. So you're framing the policy, he's got the responsibility of the implementation. So I think there's definitely something there about people's experience and what they're expecting. Yeah. There's a suggestion as well about quality statements being reviewed to remove duplication, which might speak to your point, Dave. Is it has it got too much in it, or has it got the same things in different places? And then there's disquiet about the kind of, if you have gone through the process, how long it's taking to get your answers. So I think there's probably some implementation questions which will be the responsibility of the teams who are out there on the front line. I don't know how much you can talk to that.
Well, we're at the end of the day, though, that we're different divisions. We are one team, and we want to do enough. If we're coming out, we want to do enough to change a rating where folk, if a provider thinks their current rating doesn't reflect the situation at the moment, that's what we all want. That's what the public want, is up to, things to be up to date, and we want that. So my personal view is there's no point. I would only think it absolutely exceptional, to do a piece of work. I suppose it would be around risk. If there was a risk situation that had to be dealt with, but in the normal run of events, doing enough to change a rating makes everything worthwhile. And the calculation as to how much that is will vary from situation to situation. We've certainly, in discussions I've had about, is it possible to just calculate that once and apply it? The answer's no. It depends on what's gone before. So there's, in an ideal world, you might do everything and get everybody baselined, but we've got to look at the reality of resourcing, and we don't want, we want to get things done at pace and get round as many people as possible as soon as possible, but and make it real activity. So yeah, that's the ambition, Liz, is to get there. And I think in communication around an assessment, the CQC staff talking to providers should be clear on what they're proposing to do and why. And I'd expect that to be a conversation, not a negotiation particularly, because we've got to get stuff done, but we'd want to take account of what would be meaningful. And I'm, really keen to get to, we're focusing on inadequate and RI at the moment, but I'm very keen to get to the good to outstanding as well. But it is the sequencing of it and prioritization of it, and not making out that we can do everything quickly, because that isn't the case. We want to, the commitments we want to make and give, we want those to be absolutely solid and not based on hope and expectation, but absolute confidence in that we can do that by the date we say we're doing it. And the statement on sort of content and frequency, which we'd hoped to give by now, it's got held up by so we could take account of all the DASH review, but that should be out. I think we'll have an interim statement later this month, and then a fuller statement in September. So there'll be more detail to come on that. There's so much work going on in so many different aspects, as you might imagine. And we got to be careful that we get through the right governance, as it were. And there's an additional, I think it's additional board meeting gone in for next week. So, things need to get through board, the proposals get agreed and sequenced and so on.
So just looking in the chat, there is a bit of disappointment about your point about not pausing the SAF at all, in the sense that there's a lot of issues to be addressed. So I wonder if perhaps, I think the point about the steps that you're thinking about, so some of those things you've mentioned, Dave, I think the thing that people are worried about is that trying to carry on as is with an approach that we've learned has got some shortcomings worries people. And particularly because there's already a lot to do. Your staff have already had a pretty big I mean, they've had massive change, haven't they? There's been change on all fronts. So there's an anxiety that actually the workforce isn't perhaps ready for that, and a sense that actually, it's going to take some support for the teams to be able to manage that, manage the challenges of kind of building it in flight, I guess, might be the sense that people have. So that's, people are worried that you'll be trying to speed up to do more because everybody wants a new rating, obviously, but then by doing more with something that hasn't been resolved yet, that's not going to bring value either.
Could I say a few words for a hand to Dave on that? So the SAF itself, if I think of another of my teams, the team that are undertaking local authority assessments have been using the SAF for much longer than it's been used on the provider side. So we had 5 pilots, and now we've got that program underway, and we've got confidence in the SAF through that. So I'd confidently say the SAF itself is not broken. It's the application of it in terms of, how do you factor in previous ratings and so on, which don't exist in the local authority world. So it's not the same sort of context everywhere. But I think there's been some muddle about exactly what the Dash report says and what the Secretary of State said. What I heard was not that judgments made with the SAF were fundamentally flawed. What I heard was that out-of-date ratings are unreliable, for which, who would argue with that? So I think it's really important not to muddle the message there. So I think it's I don't think the message is that when we undertake an assessment that the judgments are poor. That's not, we'd be the first to say we don't get it right in every case. Of course we don't. We're staffed by human beings. But my sense is not the concern is about when we undertake the work that the judgments are flawed against the framework. The trouble with a pause is, what would we do? What's a practical reality of a pause is that no assessments will be undertaken. It's not a case of getting the old stuff off the shelf and motoring on. And I don't think it's in anybody's interests, ours, providers, and certainly not the public, for there not to be, there not to be progress. That would be my view. But I can understand where people are coming from. But yeah, we need to make sure we're solving the right problem, don't we? Dave, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
I mean, I suppose echoing what you said about Penny's findings versus how West Streeting played it out in the media, much more, as you'd expect, I suppose, for attention, much more kind of headline grabbing from the Secretary of State, but actually working through the recommendations that from the interim report from Penny Dash, very reasonable, very helpful. Not to say that West Streeting is not reasonable and helpful as well, but these are things that we can fix and work through in a methodical way. But again, echoing you, Mary, risk doesn't stop, and we don't get it right all the time. But the best thing we've got is the professional judgment and skills of our assessment colleagues. They're being hampered through the design of a process, essentially, which we want to be able to fix. And the trick to pull off is to fix that, as you say, Liz, kind of in flight, but safely, manageably, in partnership, and in a way that meets everybody's expectations and needs, which is easy to say, but obviously more challenging to do. But yeah, I think the world doesn't stop, so we do need to continue. But the sooner we can get into the next level of detail, I suppose, in our conversations with providers and with others, the sooner we can get crunching those problems and kind of get the issues on the table in a more helpful way, and really get into that next level of detail, which certainly I'm really keen to do from my kind of policy focused role.
I think there is a view in the chat that actually the complexity is making it hard for the team. Somebody's saying feedback from inspectors and assessors suggests don't always have clarity on how to assess quality statements under the evidence categories. So that's creating a lack of confidence. So I think your point about simplification might help that. Just on the provider handbook then, presumably if people on this webinar today would like to get involved in the development of the provider handbook, will there be, how are you going to help them, and how are we going to make sure we're getting some lived experience in there?
Yeah. So when it kicks off, we'll use we'll use the range of means of contact and invitation to engage. So everything, what was Citizen Lab, now Go Vocal. There'll be information in provider bulletins. There'll be the usual sort of stakeholder meetings. So through trade association, Liz, our regular monthly meeting, I think, will be a key source of information about how to get involved. We're planning some regional road shows and engagement topics, engagement sessions on particular topics, so that people, I appreciate people are busy. People can pick and choose the area that they feel they would most like to engage with us and support us on improving. So it'll be, I'm not in a position to say exactly when that will start, but we'll use all our usual comms routes to let people know.
Okay. Ish. I mean, we're going to be starting September-ish, October-ish. Soon. How soon is soon?
I'd expect some to be kicking off next month.
I think roadshows are a good idea. There's some frustration in the chat about the void that is the lack of the not relationship management, as in the CQC market management, but that removal of a point of contact that isn't the void of the call center. So there is a lot that creates a lot of anxiety for people, partly because of the technical problems. They're not entirely sure things they've tried to send through have got through, but also when you want to just get some advice, pick somebody's brains, talk something through, have a chat, people really feel they want to have somewhere to go that is a team or an individual they can build a relationship with. And I seem to remember there was discussion about how that might evolve in one or other of Kate's messages, or possibly in one of our trade association meetings. I can't quite remember, Mayor. So I think there was a commitment to that, to helping have more local contacts. Is that right?
That's definitely right, yes. That's a big work stream at the moment, looking at various options for ways of meeting exactly that need, and the need on our side too. At the end of the day, regulation is relational, isn't it? And a sense of a place, a sense of a provider is really helpful for us. It's in everybody's interest that we know and understand each other well, isn't it? And the approach that we took has not delivered what we wanted. We were concerned about a single point of failure, but for various reasons, what we tried to do just hasn't worked. That's recognised. So lots of work going on. It won't get too far before we get some engagement going as to what would work from the provider's perspective, from the public perspective. But it's a very active piece of work at the moment.
That's good. I feel that will go some way to addressing some of the problems. You just need somewhere to go to ask the questions.
Yeah.
And try and get some consistency of a response. So I'm going to take Chair's prerogative now and just bring in the registration challenge, because we were chatting on our call earlier with members, and I want to make you an offer, because the registration delays are really significant. And there's a difference between different types of registration delay. So our offer is that you think about your registration processes slightly differently. There's a difference between an organisation or an existing provider that wants to increase the capacity of an existing service. There's a difference between an existing provider who's got credentials, who wants to register a totally new service, but have already got history with you. And then those organisations who are totally new, registering a new service. And there was also a little bit of disbelief at the idea that the process seemed to think it was reasonable to have services up and running and then a 3 to 4 months delay in actually registering them so people could live in them, with a view that, you know, if you did the equivalent in social housing, it would be kind of abhorrent. So I think in the way that you're thinking about registration, there is something that this sector can offer you that will help them meet more need, and means they haven't got people queuing up waiting for services to be approved when people are actually desperate to move into them, but also won't be damaging the operational reality of the provider, who may have a service staffed and ready to go but not registered. So I think there's something you can do in this world of data and kind of building the picture. We were suggesting on our call earlier that we could help you think about the different categories of registration that might need a different, more streamlined or slightly nuanced approach, because you already have a lot of information about the organisation, and you'll have some degree of information about their quality.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, we've always taken a differentiated approach, but I don't know how that's evolved. I'll be honest, and I think from what you've just said, Liz, it makes me think we're not delivering on that differentiated approach. So where it's just a variation to expand and it's a known entity versus brand new, it ought to be really obvious that we're taking a different tack. But that's something we can build into this partnership working that we're doing, and let's improve that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll happily take that offer. There is and in dealing with the registration backlog, I mean, part of it is explained, well, not explained, but the context is year on year significant increases in applications. So that goes to our modelling about how things are going. So we need to be geared up to deal with demand. Definitely need to do that. We have had contact with directors of adult services, and in those situations where there's a shortage and there's a service up and ready to go that the local authority would commission from, and that would deal with the shortage, we want to hear about that and put those circumstances to the front of the queue, shortly followed by those who are up and ready to go, so not hanging about. And I agree with you, it's very uncomfortable to be up and running and not registered. But so we'll take that away, Liz. That's a generous offer, and we're very pleased to work with you on that. And that is absolutely a priority for us. You know, we want to maintain an accurate register. It's a cornerstone, really.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it is, isn't it? So just thinking about our other chunk of questions, really, which was that rethinking ways of working. I think I'm just looking through some of the questions in the chat, and actually that sort of proper partnership and power balance is kind of underpinning lots of the questions in here. So there's anxiety about, you know, what happens when you haven't been able to notify properly, what happens when your reports are really delayed, what happens in terms of being able to give confidence to other people about your service, because actually we don't have the power that the regulator has. But we do have lots of other insights, and there are a few. I'll draw out in a minute some of the suggestions in the chat. But that power imbalance seems to be, well, it links to the kind of expectations about your value for money and your service level agreement. And it links to how we're going to feed into that, doing it differently, because people felt that they weren't heard during the development of the SAF. I think probably where they weren't heard was quite a lot around the portal and the technical stuff, but also as we moved from the kind of concept of the SAF to the implementation. So how do you think, what's on the cards in your suggestions for how we rebalance that relationship?
I think
go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say all roads lead to those activities that Mary talked about. You know, the road shows and the stakeholder sessions. I think, and the actual what to expect from, not just from an inspection, but you know, from CQC. You know, what is a service that you should expect. One of the original drivers for the framework, now recognizing we've got more to do, was to make it more clear and shorter, so that we empowered providers and also the public. So it was clearer. You read the we statement rather than reading, you know, pages and pages of characteristics of ratings or whatever it might be. But that was one of the intents behind the assessment framework. Now we need to come back to that and understand why that's either not been successful, or how we can strengthen that. I think that's one route, but really, I think, yeah, my main point is that we'd want to work with you and to understand, well, what are the key areas? How do you do this well? How do you address that power imbalance? How is it done in similar sectors, whether that's regulation or anything similar? So having that conversation. But Mary, do you want?
I would agree with all of that. We want regulation to be a positive, strong, effective regulation in everybody's interests, and for the vast majority, where everybody is positively motivated and doing the best for their staff, for the people they're serving, great partnerships in the systems they're operating in, focused on improvement, sharing it. That won't feel like, you know, that's the sort of atmosphere we want. There is a reality that if you're in a sector where you need to be registered to provide a service, and there is a process to go through, and somebody will make judgments, and then there will be judgments against a framework that is a statutory framework with requirements, that is going to feel like an imbalance. It just does. That is a reality, but it should not feel fearful. If it's feeling fearful, then it's gone wrong. So if something does go wrong in a relationship with the regulator, we want a culture where people are confident to raise a concern, confident to give feedback, and to know that giving feedback and speaking up will not lead to any sort of retribution that's not in anybody. That takes energy, and it's not in anybody's interests. I think it's a reality that it exists, but we want it to, because that's the framework, but we want it to feel like a partnership with mutual respect, respect for good regulation and respect for great provision of services, because it's the people receiving the services that this is all about at the end of the day. So I think a bit of a realignment, shared declarations of intent and value. The handbook can do a lot of this, I think, because once it's written down, then you've got something to wave at us in a way that we don't have at the moment. Hopefully that will help a bit.
So there's a few suggestions in the chat. Early on, somebody suggested that in terms of helping to balance that volume of services that need to be reassessed and that have got very old ratings, you could think about self-assessment and then some sort of looking at that. I mean, I'm guessing that's partly what you've got with the PIR, but, you know, it's a thought. Somebody else is suggesting co-working between the CQC and local authority QA annual visits, because there's often been quite an overlap. Somebody else is saying we've got to have a working together approach rather than threat and fear. And somebody else is saying, I don't want to be so negative, but these wafer thin and vague responses have only made my concerns worse. So we're possibly not answering everybody's questions here. I wonder if perhaps in our sort of last 10 minutes, we might just help to reassure those people who are offering ideas and who are seeing this discussion as wafer thin and vague, when we can perhaps reassure them with something that's more solid, perhaps that's it. Oh, and also lots of concern here about vulnerable people being impacted if they're in unsafe. I mean, yeah, of course, that's what it's all about. And a line or two about getting things into your comms. So let's think about, we can, you know, I do think you could ask for ideas on how to balance that need to get out to more services, but also do it well. But I think I'm a bit worried that the discussion is coming across as wafer thin and vague. So should we try to make it less wafer thin and more solid?
I'd love to. So we can. I don't know that there's anything I can say. What I can't do is run ahead of a board discussion next week. I can't run ahead of what we're involving our staff in and making decisions there. What I can say is there is a mass of activity focused on, you know, much of what Penny Dash found was reflecting what we told her. So we've got, we have informed the report. There's a lot of insight into what, you know, CQC is full of passionate people who want to do the right thing, who themselves have been frustrated at some of the barriers and challenges. So we've got a lot of activity going on. There's a danger actually that we've got too much going on. So we're trying to take real steps not to repeat the mistakes of the past. So it's a case of prioritizing and sequencing. There are things that naturally fall, in an order that makes sense to do. So we want to do that. We don't want to race ahead without making sure that our unions are fully involved and able to influence, that our equality networks are involved as well. And all our voices we're interested in, but we want to avoid unintended consequences for providers and for our own teams, because the work that we undertake has got to make things better. Everyone is really focused on that. There's been reference to how our colleagues are feeling. Absolutely. One of Kate's absolute priorities is for people here to have a better day at work. You can imagine what you've been thinking for a while. A lot of people at CQC have been thinking. And now we've had a change. There's recognition. I think the timing of Penny Dash was fantastic for us because it's another source, and it's, you know, if I was sat where you are, it's trusted, isn't it? It's external. Someone's looking at it and reporting, and the Secretary of State's talking about it. So there's a independence to that, which is very helpful. So we want to really support people at CQC we want people to stay, we want people to come back, we want to recruit people. So that's really important. We're absolutely committed to improving our operational performance. So that's all about more inspections, timelier inspection reports, still being able to respond to risk, but really eating into the backlogs that we've got of old ratings. That's absolutely top priority. And so you might imagine that an organisation in that position, we're looking at how we can marshal our people in the best way to get that done. We've talked about better relationship management. We see that absolutely. There's a huge piece of work around that. It should not be too much longer before we can engage on the details of our thinking We want to improve the provider portal. I know that's off the agenda for today, but goodness me,
we could do another one on that.
Oh,
we'll get Mark along.
Could we? We certainly could. So, and board meeting next week, which will be another milestone. I think the road shows have been really important. And my commitment, our commitment today is the way forward is partnership, co-design, engagement, so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. And more than that, that if you've, bothered to engage and give us your feedback, that we're clear what we've done with it. I mean, we won't be able to please everybody, will we? That would be a hiding to nothing.
No, I was going to say that. You won't please everybody.
No, and we've got different interests to balance, with the interests of the people receiving a service absolutely at the heart of it. But we want to recover our operational performance so that we can come back stronger and be able to be an influential voice at the top table for care, for health. I want our annual state of care report to be really influential, and the best state of care reports are when we've had that engagement, we've done enough assessment to speak with authority on behalf of services and on behalf of people. So that I'm going to stop now, because that's just I'm sounding like a political speech to myself, and I'm sure that's how some colleagues are hearing it. But what I'm trying to convey is, I'm sorry I haven't got more detail that I can, that we can share today, but be assured there's a lot going on. Kate's driving us on, and the board meeting next week will be another milestone. But the sooner we can get out more concrete information, Liz, the happier we'll all be, I know.
Yeah, I know. And I really appreciate you coming along to talk to us. I know we had this in the diary for ages, and then the landscape moved very quickly around us. So all credit to you for being ready to come along. A couple of things in the chat, just as a final thing to think about. There is quite a lot of concern about CQC kind of capacity and resourcing. So I think that is something it's really worth being able to talk about well after the board meeting, knowing that colleagues have been through lots of change, and then there's going to be some more, and they've had a big reorganization, and there's all that. And then somebody who very fairly has said, can we email these questions to Mary and Dave? I feel the setup of the webinar has meant they're unable to give in-depth responses if we've cornered them slightly and they haven't had time to prepare. To be fair, we did try and cover the topic area broadly, but I only thought about the other questions today. So it's a fair comment. So would you like us to send you the slides with the questions on, and have a look at whether there's more in-depth stuff you could provide post board meeting? Would that help you?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, I do acknowledge to all our participants that it's been a bit things have moved around us at pace. So I'm going to say a massive thank you to both Mary and Dave for being prepared to come and talk to us about the very challenging and fast-moving situation that we've got at the moment. I'm really pleased that you're planning the provider handbook, and that the relationship options are coming back. And the trade association. If you're not in a trade association, folks, you probably want to join one, because it's a really helpful way of getting access to the latest information. So we're obviously not for profit, but there are other trade associations are available, and we do get the opportunity to talk to the CQC regularly. So yeah, big thanks from us, and thanks Lisa for hosting us. Thank you to CMM, and I'll send you the slides with the questions on, and we can see what how that, because that might shape some of your comments you put out post board meeting maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you
so much. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.